What happens when a force that once controlled nearly a third of Syria agrees to let the central government back into its strongest cities just weeks after losing most of its territory in open fighting? That question now hangs over northeast Syria, where a single agreement signed on Friday could either lock in the most significant ceasefire since the civil war began, or quietly redraw the balance of power in a country still struggling to reassemble itself after 14 years of conflict. If this deal holds, Syria's fragmented map could begin closing for the first time since 2011. If it fails, the fighting that erupted in January could resume at a larger scale, drawing in regional actors who have spent years backing opposing sides. And if it succeeds too fully, it may permanently alter the political leverage of Kurdish forces whose autonomy has defined Syria's northeast for nearly a decade. The agreement was announced by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, and later confirmed by Damascus. It follows weeks of clashes that began in early January in Aleppo, where negotiations over military integration collapsed and escalated into direct confrontation. The fighting ended with a ceasefire last week, but only after the SDF lost control of most of its remaining territory in the northeast to government advances. Under the new framework, security forces affiliated with Syria's interior ministry will enter the cities of al-Hasaka and Qamishli, areas where government forces had long been barred. These cities sit at the administrative and symbolic heart of Kurdish self-rule. Their opening marks a decisive shift away from the de facto autonomy that emerged after Syrian troops withdrew from much of the region in 2012. The agreement also outlines a phased military integration. 3 brigades from the SDF are to be reorganized into a new unit within Syria's armed forces, while an additional SDF brigade will be embedded into a government formation operating in Aleppo province. This structure is designed to absorb Kurdish fighters without dissolving them outright, but it also places them under central command for the first time. Beyond the battlefield, the deal extends into governance. Local institutions that have operated independently across northeast Syria will be folded into state structures along with their employees. Civil and educational rights for Kurdish communities are formally acknowledged, and provisions are included to enable the return of displaced residents to areas affected by fighting. To understand why this matters, it helps to look backward. The SDF was formed in 2015 as a coalition of Kurdish, Arab, and minority militias, rising to prominence with US backing during the campaign against Islamic State. At its peak, the force controlled roughly 30% of Syrian territory and governed an area home to about 4 million people. That autonomy was never internationally recognized, but it endured because Damascus lacked the capacity to reverse it while fighting on multiple fronts. That balance shifted after the fall of former President Bashar Assad in December 2024. Syria's new leadership under interim President Ahmad al-Shara inherited a fractured state, but also a moment of opportunity. Over the past year, Damascus has worked to reassert authority incrementally, prioritizing negotiations where possible and force where talks stalled. An integration agreement was announced in March, but it failed to gain traction. Months of stalled discussions followed, ending abruptly when fighting broke out on January 6th in Aleppo. Within weeks, government forces reclaimed most SDF-held territory in the northeast, fundamentally weakening the group's negotiating position. The United States played a quieter but consequential role. Washington had backed the SDF for nearly a decade, providing arms, training, and air support against Islamic State. But under the new Syrian leadership, the US recalibrated. It did not intervene militarily during the January clashes, instead pressing both sides toward a negotiated settlement. That shift signaled to the SDF that external guarantees could no longer be assumed. What if this agreement succeeds fully? In that scenario, Syria could begin consolidating territorial control without large-scale fighting, freeing resources to focus on reconstruction and border security. Kurdish forces would retain cultural recognition and partial institutional presence, but without the autonomy that once defined their power. For Damascus, it would mark the most complete restoration of sovereignty since the war began. What if it collapses? A breakdown would likely reignite conflict across northeast Syria, where front lines remain fluid and trust is minimal. Kurdish fighters, stripped of territory but still armed, could return to insurgent tactics. Regional actors, including Turkey, would closely monitor such instability, potentially exploiting renewed chaos to pursue their own security objectives. There is also a third path. If integration proceeds unevenly, Syria could enter a prolonged hybrid phase, where former SDF units exist inside the state but retain informal loyalties. That outcome could reduce open conflict while embedding long-term friction inside Syria's security architecture, delaying true stabilization. International reactions highlight the stakes. The US envoy to Syria described the agreement as a historic milestone toward unity, explicitly praising Kurdish contributions against extremism. He also pointed to recent decrees recognizing Kurdish as a national language alongside Arabic, adopting the Nowruz festival as an official holiday, and annulling citizenship restrictions imposed by a 1962 census that had left tens of thousands stateless. These steps signal an effort to address grievances that long fueled Kurdish distrust of Damascus. At the same time, Russian forces have begun pulling back from bases in northeast Syria, reducing an external buffer that once complicated negotiations. Their partial withdrawal underscores how regional dynamics are shifting, with fewer foreign actors willing to anchor contested zones indefinitely. For Syria's neighbors, the outcome matters beyond borders. A stabilized northeast could reduce cross-border militancy and refugee flows. A renewed conflict could do the opposite, pushing instability into Iraq and Turkey and reopening corridors for extremist groups that thrive in ungoverned spaces. As Syria moves forward, the critical signals to watch will not be announcements, but implementation. The pace of security deployments, the treatment of integrated fighters, the return of displaced civilians, and the durability of local governance reforms will determine whether this agreement becomes a foundation or a footnote.